The chalk snapped in Jack's hand. A sharp, dry sound that cut through the quiet classroom, followed by a sudden silence as all the children looked up at him at once, their small voices stopping mid-sentence, their eyes wide with confusion. Jack didn't notice. He was still staring at the board, his mind somewhere else for just a brief second until... Jack! A voice burst through the doorway. A little boy, breathless, face flushed, eyes panicked. Jack, you need to come now. Jack turned instantly. What happened? The boy struggled to catch his breath. It's tooting at the market. That was enough. Jack dropped the chalk. Without another word, he ran. The path from the village classroom to the market had never felt so long. His steps were fast, almost stumbling, his heart pounding violently against his chest, not from the run, but from the fear growing with every second, because something in that boy's voice was wrong, very wrong. Meanwhile, at the market, everything had already exploded. Take it. Jack's mother stood there, holding out a thick envelope, her posture straight, her voice calm, but cold, calculated, like every word had already been decided long before she arrived. Tử Tiên stood across from her, still, silent, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. I don't want your money, Tử Tiên said, her voice quiet but firm. Jack's mother smiled faintly. You should think carefully. I already did. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No doubt. I'm not leaving him. The air shifted. The crowd around them grew quiet, because everyone knew this wasn't just a conversation. This was a battle. Jack's mother lowered the envelope slowly. Her eyes hardened. You think you can give him a better life? She asked. Tử Tiên didn't respond, because she didn't need to. Her silence was already the answer. A small laugh escaped from Jack's mother. Cold. Sharp. Do you even know who he is? She continued. What he gave up for you? I didn't ask him to, Tử Tiên replied. But you didn't stop him either. That line cut deep. Tử Tien's fingers tightened slightly, but she didn't step back. Jack's mother took a step closer, lowering her voice. You don't belong in his world. Tử Tiên looked up. And he doesn't belong in yours. For a brief moment, silence. Heavy. Tense. Unmovable. Jack's mother exhaled slowly. Then her expression changed. Something darker. More dangerous. Fine, she said quietly. If you won't leave, she turned slightly, pulled out her phone, dialed. Come here. She ended the call. Without another word. Minutes later, the sound of a motorbike broke through the market. People stepped aside instinctively, because they recognized it. A Pao. He arrived with confidence, stepping off the bike slowly, his eyes scanning the scene before landing on Tử Tiên. Then a smirk. So this is what you called me for? Jack's mother didn't look at him. Say what you told me. A Pao raised an eyebrow slightly, then laughed. You sure? Her silence was the answer. A Pao stepped forward, looking straight at Tử Tiên, then loud enough for everyone to hear. This girl, he scoffed. She's not as innocent as you all think. The crowd stirred. Whispers began. T'es une fauche. What are you saying? She asked. A Pao shrugged. I've seen her with other men, he said casually. More than once. The words dropped like stones, one by one, crushing everything. That's not true. Tử Tien's voice shook for the first time. But A Pao only laughed. You think I'd lie, he said. Ask around. The crowd didn't respond, didn't defend, didn't step forward, because standing there was Jack's mother, and no one wanted trouble. Tử Tiên looked around, at the people she knew, at the faces that once smiled at her, now avoiding her eyes, silent, still, and that silence was louder than any accusation. Her vision blurred. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them, because at that moment she understood. She was alone. I trusted this place, she whispered, but no one answered. A Pao stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for her to hear. You should have left when you had the chance. And then a force hit him from the side. Hard. Unexpected. A Pao was thrown off balance, stumbling before falling to the ground as the crowd gasped, stepping back instantly. Jack, standing there, breathing hard, eyes burning. Say that again. His voice was low, dangerous, controlled. A Pao looked up, surprised, then smirked again. You heard me. That was enough. Jack stepped forward, grabbing his shirt, then shoving him back down. Don't you dare talk about her like that. The tension exploded. Jack. Tu Tian's voice broke, but he didn't stop, because this time it wasn't about control. It wasn't about holding back. It was about protecting. Jack turned, facing his mother, and for the first time there was no hesitation, no doubt, no distance. Mom, he said, his voice steady, but filled with everything he had held in. Please, a pause. Then, let us go. The entire market fell silent, because those words were not just a request. They were a line. His mother looked at him, long cold, unreadable, and for a moment, no one knew what would happen next. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said before, as if the entire market had stopped breathing, waiting for something to break, waiting for someone to move first, and in the middle of it all, Jack stood between Tu Tian and his mother, his shoulders tense, his hands still slightly trembling from the moment he pushed A Pao to the ground, but his eyes had never been clearer. His mother looked at him, not angry, not shouting, just cold. You're choosing her, she said quietly. Not a question, a statement. Jack didn't hesitate. Yes. The answer landed harder than any argument, because there was no doubt left. Behind him, Tu Tian stood still, her tears still falling silently, her hands slowly unclenching at her sides, because even though the pain was still there, even though the words that had just been thrown at her still echoed in her mind, one thing had become clear. He chose her. In front of everyone. Without hesitation. On the ground, A Pao pushed himself up slowly, wiping the dirt from his clothes, his expression darker now, more irritated than before, because things had not gone the way he expected. He glanced at Jack, then at Tu Tian, then at the crowd, and something inside him twisted. You really believe her? He said, his voice sharper now. Jack turned his head slightly. That's enough. A Pao let out a short laugh. You think pushing me changes anything? He scoffed. People already heard what I said. The crowd shifted uneasily, because that part was true. Words once spoken didn't disappear. Tu Tian lowered her gaze slightly. The weight of it pressed down again. But before it could sink deeper, Jack stepped back. Just one step. Until he stood directly beside her. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. Equal. Then let's finish this properly, Jack said. His voice calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that made people listen. He looked at A Pao. You said you saw her with other men. A Pao crossed his arms. I did. Jack nodded slightly. When? A pause. A small one. But noticeable. A Pao's eyes flickered for just a second. Before, he said vaguely. Jack didn't look away. Where? Another pause. Longer this time. The crowd leaned in slightly, because now it wasn't just shouting anymore. It was truth being pulled apart. You think I need to explain myself to you? A Pao snapped, trying to regain control. No, Jack said quietly. But if you're accusing someone in front of everyone, then yes. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because suddenly the confidence A Pao had earlier wasn't as solid anymore. Jack took another step forward. You can lie, he continued. But lies need details. That line shifted everything. The crowd began to murmur again. Different this time. Doubtful. Questioning. A Pao is gotaitant. His eyes darted briefly toward Jack's mother. Just for a second. But it was enough. Jack saw it. And so did a few others. Or, Jack added slowly, you were told to say this. The words hung in the air. Sharp. Direct. Dangerous. Tu Tian looked up instantly. Her eyes moved from Jack to his mother. And in that moment something clicked. The crowd followed. Turning. Looking. Waiting. Jack's mother didn't react immediately. She stood there. Perfectly still. Her expression unchanged. But her silence said more than any denial. A Pao stepped back slightly. This is stupid, he muttered. I don't have time for this. He turned, as if to leave. But, stop. The voice came from the crowd. An older man. Firm. Clear. We've lived here long enough to know who Tu Tien is. Another voice followed. She's never caused trouble. And you? Someone else added, looking at A Pao. This isn't the first time. The tension shifted again. Not toward Jack. Not toward Tu Tien. But toward him. A Pao's expression darkened. This has nothing to do with you. It does when you lie in front of all of us, the older man replied. More people stepped forward. Not aggressively, but enough. Enough to show they were no longer silent. Tu Tien stood frozen. Because she hadn't expected this. Not after what just happened. Not after the silence earlier. But now they were speaking. Jack glanced at her. Then gently took her hand. A small gesture. But steady. Reassuring. I told you, he said softly. You're not alone. Her fingers tightened around his. Just slightly. A Pao clicked his tongue. Frustrated. Cornered. Then looked at Jack one last time. This isn't over. The same words. But weaker now. Less certain. He got back on his bike. Started the engine. And left. Without looking back. The noise of the engine faded. And with it, the weight in the air slowly lifted. Jack turned. Facing his mother again. But this time there was no anger left. Just distance. Quiet. Final. Please don't come here again, he said. His voice wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. Because the meaning was clear. His mother looked at him. Long deep. Searching for something. Anything. But she found nothing. Because the son she once controlled was gone. Without another word, she turned. And walked away. Her steps slow. But heavy. Because for the first time she wasn't the one in control. Back in the market, the crowd slowly began to disperse. But not before a few people stepped closer to Tu Tien. Not saying much. Just small nods. Quiet support. The kind that comes late. But still matters. Tu Tien stood there. Still shaken. Still hurt. But not broken. Not anymore. Jack gently pulled her closer. Not tightly. Just enough. I'm here, he said. She nodded slightly. Resting her forehead against his shoulder for a brief moment. Because right now that was enough. But deep down both of them knew. This wasn't the end. Because people like his mother don't stop. They wait. They plan. They return. And somewhere far away, a phone screen lit up again. A call being made. A voice calm. Cold. We try another way. Back in the quiet mountain village, Jack and Tu Tien stood together. Stronger. Closer. But now they understood something they hadn't before. Love alone was not enough. It had to be protected. Fought for. Every single time. And whether they could survive what was coming next was a story still waiting to unfold.